I'd been chasing this gig for months, a night shift bud trimmer at a marijuana dispensary in Colorado? For $22 an hour? Are you kidding me? It was the ultimate dream for a guy like me. I've been an avid stoner since high school. Not the couch-locked burnout type, but the let me debate you on quantum physics because I'm totally qualified after this joint type. Finally, I could make a living doing something I loved without feeling like I was grinding my life away. When I showed up for my first shift, I knew right away this was going to be interesting. My boss, Marley, yes, his real name, looked like a walking stereotype. He had long, matted dreadlocks, eyes so red and glossy you'd think he was permanently allergic to air, and a laugh that sounded like a rusty engine sputtering to life. He waved me in like we were old friends. "Yo, Jack, welcome to the team, dude. You're gonna love it here. Chill vibes, good pay, and we even get to sample the products sometimes, you know what I'm saying?" He winked at me like he just handed me the key to the universe. I nodded eagerly, feeling like I'd just hit the jackpot. There were two other night shift trimmers. Chris, a lanky dude with a perpetual smirk who looked like he lived on Red Bull and conspiracy theories, and Tasha, a sharp-tongued woman who clearly didn't take crap from anyone. She wore a t-shirt that read, "You can't spell cannabis without can." The first few hours were easy. We sat at a long metal table in the back room, trimming buds and chatting. Marley had a playlist of reggae classics blaring from a beat-up speaker, and the air smelled like heaven, if heaven were a combination of pine trees and skunk. Chris was rambling about how the government was tracking people through vape pens when Marley decided to drop some wisdom. "All right, listen up, guys," Marley said, his tone suddenly serious. "I know you're all here to trim some primo buds and vibe out, but there's a few rules you gotta follow on the night shift. These ain't negotiable, you dig?" Tasha rolled her eyes. "Rules? What is this, kindergarten?" Marley ignored her and pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. The rules were written in shaky handwriting, and I couldn't tell if it was from age or other substances. If you hear faint laughter, do not investigate. Keep the trimming area spotless. Messy tables attract them. If the lights flicker, stop working and stay silent until they stabilize. Never leave the building during your shift. They're worse outside. Do not smoke the Emerald Mischief strain. Ever. Chris snorted. "What's this? Some stoner ghost story?" Marley didn't laugh. "Man, you don't want to mess around with this stuff. Just follow the rules, and you'll be fine. Trust me." We all nodded, half skeptical but too chill to argue. I mean, how serious could this be? It's weed. How bad could it get? By midnight, the vibe was still good. We trimmed, laughed, and made dumb jokes about being professional bud sculptors. I couldn't believe I was actually getting paid for this. But then, around 1 a.m., things started to get weird. At first, it was subtle. I'd see movement out of the corner of my eye like a shadow darting across the room. When I turned my head, there'd be nothing there. I figured it was my imagination or maybe the secondhand smoke clouding my brain. But then I started hearing faint giggles, high-pitched like a child's, but not quite human. It was coming from the supply closet. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, my voice cracking just a little. "Hear what?" Tasha said, not looking up from her trimming. Chris smirked. "What strain did you smoke before this, dude?" "I'm serious." It sounded like laughing. My heart was pounding, but I forced out a laugh to play it cool. "Man, this strain is killer." Tasha finally looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Wait, did you touch the Emerald Mischief?" "No." Marley said not to. "Good," she said, going back to her work. "Because if you did, you're on your own." Chris rolled his eyes but didn't say anything. I shrugged it off and kept trimming, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The room felt colder, and the shadows seemed sharper, like they were watching us. At 2 a.m., the lights flickered. Not just a little flicker, but a full-on strobe effect for a solid 10 seconds. All three of us froze. I remembered Marley's rule and stayed completely silent, my hands gripping the scissors so tightly my knuckles turned white. When the light stabilized, Chris let out a nervous laugh. Man, I thought this place was supposed to be chill. Shut up, Tasha snapped. Don't joke about it. Chris opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, we all heard it. A faint giggle, louder this time. It sounded like it was right behind us. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was nothing there. Just shadows. Okay. Seriously, what the hell was that? I whispered. Tasha didn't answer. She was staring at the supply closet, her face pale. The door was slightly ajar, and I could have sworn I saw a tiny shadow dart inside. For the first time all night, Chris looked genuinely spooked. Maybe Marley's not as crazy as he looks, he muttered. None of us moved for a while. We just sat there, listening to the silence, which felt heavier than it should have. Then, faintly, we heard the sound of something scratching at the walls. The scratching sound was faint at first, like the skittering of tiny claws against drywall. It came from the walls, the ceiling, and even under the table. My pulse quickened as I looked at Chris and Tasha, hoping someone would crack a joke or explain it away. But no one spoke. Finally, Tasha broke the silence. We need to clean up now. What? I asked, confused. The tables, she snapped, already sweeping stray trimmings into a plastic bin. Rule 2, messy tables attract them, whatever the hell them is. Chris let out a nervous laugh, but he didn't argue. He started tidying up his area while muttering, "This is insane. We're really following rules from a guy who looks like he fell out of a Bob Marley poster?" "Just do it," Tasha hissed, her voice trembling. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking as I cleaned. The scratching grew louder, moving faster, like a dozen tiny creatures racing through the walls. Every so often, I'd hear a faint giggle, high-pitched and eerie, sending chills down my spine. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe a really intense strain of weed messing with my head. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. When the tables were spotless, the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. It was so heavy, so unnatural, that it made my ears ring. I could hear Chris's ragged breathing and Tasha muttering under her breath, something about how she should have stuck to day shifts. We sat there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Chris broke the tension. "Okay, so we cleaned up. Can we, go back to pretending this isn't happening?" "Sure," Tasha said dryly. "Let's just ignore the tiny demons in the walls." "Great plan, Chris." Chris rolled his eyes but didn't say anything. We went back to trimming, but the mood had shifted. The reggae music playing in the background felt out of place now, like it was mocking us. I focused on my work, trying to drown out the lingering unease. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A tiny figure darted across the room, barely more than a blur. It was fast, too fast for me to get a good look, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. My heart leapt into my throat, and I dropped my scissors with a loud clatter. "What's wrong?" Tasha asked, her voice sharp. I saw something," I stammered. "Over there." I pointed to the corner of the room near the supply closet. Chris laughed nervously. "Dude, you're tripping." "I'm not," I snapped. "It was small, like a little person. It ran into the corner." Tasha's expression darkened. "Did it have teeth?" I blinked. "What?" "Teeth," she repeated. "Sharp ones. Did you see them?" I shook my head, confused. "I didn't see its face, just the shape." Tasha sighed and rubbed her temples. "Great. Just great." Chris threw up his hands. "Okay, I'm officially out. This is too much. Either Marley slipped something into the air filters, or we're all losing it." Before Tasha could respond, the lights flickered again. This time it wasn't just a quick strobe. They went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. "Stay still," Tasha whispered. "Don't make a sound." My heart pounded as I sat there, motionless. The darkness was suffocating, and the faint hum of the building's machinery only made it worse. Then I heard it. The giggling, louder now, and closer. It wasn't just one voice. There were several. all overlapping in a discordant symphony of childish laughter. Something brushed against my leg. I bit down on a scream, my body rigid with fear. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a faint glow, like two tiny eyes reflecting light. They were staring at me from beneath the table. The giggling stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl. The thing under the table moved, and I felt its clawed hand scrape against my shoe. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted upright, knocking my chair over in the process. The sound shattered the silence, and the room erupted into chaos. The giggling turned into shrieks, and I saw them. 3 small figures, no taller than a toddler, but grotesque in every way. Their skin was mottled in green, their eyes glowing like fireflies, and their mouths were filled with razor-sharp teeth. "Oh my God!" Chris yelled, stumbling backward. One of the creatures lunged at him, and he swatted it away with a clipboard. "What the hell are these things?" "Leprechauns," Tasha said grimly, grabbing a metal tray as a makeshift weapon. "Or something like them. Marley warned me about this crap, but I thought he was just high." "Warned you?" I shouted, dodging another creature as it swiped at my leg. "When were you gonna tell us?" "Didn't think it'd get this bad," she yelled, swinging the tray at one of the creatures. It hissed and skittered away, disappearing into the shadows. Chris wasn't so lucky. One of the creatures climbed up his back and sank its teeth into his ear. He screamed in pain, flailing wildly until he managed to fling it off. Blood poured down the side of his face as he stumbled toward the door. "I'm out! I'm done! Screw this job!" he shouted, wrenching the door open and running into the night. Tasha and I stood there, breathing hard, the creatures nowhere to be seen. The lights flickered back on, casting the room in an eerie glow. Blood stained the floor where Chris had been standing, and the faint smell of copper lingered in the air. "Think they'll believe him at the hospital?" I asked weakly. "Nope," Tasha said, her voice flat. "They'll think he was too high." We stared at each other, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What the hell do we do now? After Chris's dramatic exit, the room felt oppressively empty. Tasha and I stood there in stunned silence, the blood-stained floor a grim reminder of what we were dealing with. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I had to fight the urge to grab my keys and follow Chris out the door. But then I remembered Rule 4. Never leave in the middle of a shift, no matter what happens. "Okay," I said, breaking the silence. "What now? Do we just keep working?" Tasha gave me a withering look. "Do you want to get eaten by those things, no? Then yeah, we follow the damn rules." I swallowed hard and nodded. Right. Rules. We went back to trimming in silence, but my focus was shot. Every little noise made me flinch, every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the HVAC system. My mind kept replaying the sight of those creatures, their sharp teeth, their glowing eyes, the way they giggled like kids who just pulled off a prank. Tasha, on the other hand, seemed eerily calm. She worked methodically, her hands steady as she snipped away at the buds. I wanted to ask her how she was keeping it together, but I was afraid of breaking the fragile peace that had settled over the room. Then the whispers started. At first, I thought it was just the wind. The building wasn't exactly airtight, and a drafty night in Colorado could make some weird noises. But these whispers weren't random. They were words, faint and indistinct, like someone speaking from another room. I glanced at Tasha. Her shoulders were tense, and she was gripping her scissors so tightly her knuckles were white. "You hear that?" I asked quietly. She nodded. "Don't answer them." "Answer them?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" Before she could respond, one of the whispers grew louder. It was a childlike voice, sweet and sing-songy, like a nursery rhyme. "Jack!" it called, drawing out my name in a playful tone. "Comply with us!" My blood ran cold. "They know my name." "They know everything," Tasha said through gritted teeth. "Just ignore it. Keep working." The voice giggled, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "We like you, Jack. You're funny. You're cut." Something cold brushed against the back of my neck, and I whipped around, expecting to see one of those creatures standing behind me. But there was nothing there, just the empty room and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. "I can't do this," I whispered. "This is insane." "You want to quit?" Tasha said, not looking up from her work. "Be my guest, but don't come crying to me when those things hunt you down." I stared at her, stunned. "Hunt me down?" She finally looked up, her expression grim. "Rule 4, Jack. You don't leave in the middle of a shift." Marley didn't explain why, but I've seen what happens to people who break that rule. It's not pretty. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was being ridiculous, but the memory of Chris's bloodied ear stopped me. Instead, I clenched my jaw and forced myself to keep trimming. The whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent, but I ignored them. Then the lights went out again. This time, the darkness was absolute. Even the faint glow of the exit sign had disappeared, leaving us in a pitch-black void. I heard Tasha curse under her breath, followed by the sound of her fumbling for her phone. "Stay still," she whispered. "Don't move." I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the table. The darkness seemed alive, pressing in around me, and I could hear the faint rustle of movement all around us. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growling. "Where's your phone?" Tasha hissed. "In my pocket," I whispered back. "Why?" "Turn on the flashlight. Slowly." My fingers fumbled as I pulled out my phone and activated the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the room in harsh white light. And there they were. Dozens of the little creatures surrounded us, their glowing eyes reflecting the light like tiny, malevolent stars. They crouched on tables, clung to the walls, and peeked out from behind supply bins. Their sharp teeth glinted as they grinned at us, and their tiny hands clawed at the air. "Don't let them touch you," Tasha said, her voice tight. "No kidding," I muttered, backing toward the supply closet. The creatures didn't move, but their eyes followed me, unblinking. One of them let out a high-pitched giggle, and the others joined in, their laughter echoing through the room. It was a sound that made my skin crawl, like nails on a chalkboard mixed with the cries of a dying animal. "We need to get to the back office," Tasha said. "Now." "What's in the back office?" I asked, my voice shaking. "The panic button. Marley installed it after the last incident." I didn't ask what she meant by last incident. I didn't want to know. We moved slowly, keeping the flashlight trained on the creatures as we made our way toward the back of the room. The creatures didn't follow us, but their eyes never left us. One of them licked its lips, its tongue long and black like a serpent's. We reached the office door and Tasha fumbled with the keycard. "Hurry up," I whispered, glancing over my shoulder. The creatures were still watching, but a few of them had started to inch closer. "I'm trying," Tasha snapped, swiping the card again. The door finally beeped and she shoved it open. We stumbled inside and slammed the door shut behind us. "Now what?" I asked, breathing hard. Tasha pointed to a red button on the wall. "Hit that." I pressed it without hesitation. A loud alarm blared, and the room filled with red strobe lights. Outside, the creatures screamed in unison, a shrill, ear-splitting sound that made me cover my ears. And then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, they were gone. The silence after the alarm was deafening. Tasha and I sat slumped against the back office wall, our breathing ragged. My heart was racing, and every muscle in my body felt like it was ready to snap. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tasha didn't answer right away. She was staring at the door, her expression a mix of exhaustion and fear. Finally, she sighed and said, "They're called lurkers." "Lurkers?" I repeated, incredulous. "What? Like some kind of weed goblins?" She gave me a sharp look. "This isn't a joke, Jack. Those things are real, and they're dangerous. Marley's been dealing with them for years." I laughed bitterly. "You're kidding me, right? Marley? The dude who can barely keep his eyes open half the time? He knows about this?" "Of course he knows," Tasha snapped. "Why do you think the rules exist? Why do you think he only hires people who are desperate enough to ignore how weird this place is? The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought back to the job interview, to how eager I'd been to land this gig. At the time, $22 an hour had seemed like a dream come true. Now it felt like blood money. So what are we supposed to do? I asked. Just keep working like nothing's wrong? Tasha nodded grimly. Pretty much. As long as we follow the rules, we'll be okay. And what happens if we don't? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Her expression darkened. You don't want to know. Before I could press her further, there was a knock at the door. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone was drumming their fingers against the wood. Don't answer it, Tasha said immediately. Who would even... I began, but she cut me off with a sharp gesture. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Jack, a voice called, low and raspy. It's me, Chris. Let me in. My blood turned to ice. That's not possible. Chris left. Tasha's face was pale. It's not him. They can mimic voices. It's a trick. The knocking stopped, replaced by the sound of something scratching at the door. Come on, man, the voice pleaded. I'm hurt. I need help. I covered my ears, trying to block out the sound. It didn't help. The voice seemed to seep into my mind, filling my thoughts with fear and doubt. They're just messing with us, Tasha said, her voice steady. Ignore it. They can't get in unless we let them. I nodded, though it took every ounce of willpower I had to stay put. My instincts were screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this nightmare as possible. But the memory of the rules kept me rooted in place. After what felt like an eternity, the voice finally stopped. The scratching faded, and the silence returned. We're not going to make it through this, I said quietly. Tasha gave me a grim smile. You'd be surprised. People are tougher than they think. I wasn't so sure. The rest of the night passed in a tense, surreal blur. The creatures didn't return, but their presence lingered in the back of my mind, a constant source of anxiety. By the time the morning shift arrived, I was a wreck. Marley strolled in around 7 a.m., looking as carefree as ever. He gave us a lazy smile and said, "Morning, dudes. How was the night shift?" I stared at him, my mouth hanging open. You're joking, right? We almost got killed. Marley chuckled. Yeah, that happens sometimes. But you made it through, so congrats. Congrats? I repeated, my voice rising. That's all you have to say? He shrugged. Look, man, I told you about the rules. If you follow them, you'll be fine. Simple as that. I wanted to scream, to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until he took this seriously. But Tasha put a hand on my arm, her expression warning me to let it go. Just go home, Jack, she said quietly. Get some rest. I didn't argue. I grabbed my things and left without another word. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I couldn't stop thinking about the creatures, about their glowing eyes and sharp teeth. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their grinning faces, heard their high-pitched laughter. I thought about quitting, about walking away from the job and never looking back. But then I thought about the rules, about what might happen if I broke them. I was trapped. The next night I showed up to work with a pit in my stomach. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to turn around and leave, to quit this job and never look back. But I knew that wasn't an option. Tasha's words kept replaying in my mind. You don't want to know what happens if you break the rules. Marley greeted me with his usual lazy grin. Looking good, dude. You ready for another night? I didn't answer. I just clocked in and headed to the trimming station. Tasha was already there, her face pale and drawn. She gave me a small nod, and we got to work. The first few hours were uneventful. We worked in silence, the rhythmic snip-snip of the scissors the only sound in the room. For a while, I almost managed to convince myself that the previous night had been a bad dream. But then the lights flickered. I froze, my heart pounding. Tasha set down her scissors and grabbed my arm. Don't move, she whispered. The lights flickered again, then went out completely. Darkness enveloped the room, thick and suffocating. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. "Stay quiet," Tasha hissed. A low, guttural growl echoed through the room. It was followed by the sound of tiny feet scurrying across the floor. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. "Jack," a voice called softly. It was high-pitched and sing-song, like a child's. "Come out and play." I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The voice grew louder, closer. "We know you're here, Jack. We can smell you." Something brushed against my leg, and I bit down on my lip to keep from screaming. The growling intensified, and I could feel the air grow colder. "They're testing us," Tasha whispered. "Just stay still." The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. The creatures moved around the room, their movements erratic and unpredictable. At one point, I heard something climb onto the table in front of me. I could feel its hot breath on my face, but I didn't dare move. Finally, after what felt like hours, the lights flickered back on. The creatures were gone. Tasha let out a shaky breath. "We need to finish up and get out of here." I nodded, too shaken to speak. We worked as quickly as we could, our hands trembling as we trimmed the buds and bagged them up. By the time the shift was over, I was on the verge of collapse. Tasha and I clocked out without a word and headed for the parking lot. Marley was waiting for us by the door, his usual grin plastered across his face. "Good job, dudes," he said. "You made it through another night." I stared at him, my hands clenched into fists. "Why don't you ever work the night shift?" I demanded. Marley's grin faltered. "I've paid my dues, man. It's your turn now." Before I could respond, Tasha grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the parking lot. "Let it go, Jack," she said quietly. We parted ways, and I drove home in silence. That night, I had a dream. Or maybe it was a nightmare. I was back in the dispensary, but the lights were off and the creatures were everywhere. They surrounded me, their glowing eyes and sharp teeth filling the darkness. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. One of the creatures stepped forward. It was smaller than the others, no bigger than a child, but its presence was overwhelming. It smiled, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "This is our home," it said. "You're the intruders." I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The next day, I quit my job. Marley didn't try to stop me. He just shrugged and said, "Your call, dude." Tasha stayed. She said she needed the money, that she could handle it. I wished her luck and walked away. I stopped smoking weed after that. The thought of it made my stomach turn. I tried to go back to my old life, but I couldn't shake the memories of what I'd seen. The creatures, the rules, the fear. It was all burned into my brain. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear them. The high-pitched laughter, the scurrying footsteps, the growls. I tell myself it's just my imagination, but deep down, I know the truth. They're still out there, and they're watching.